Republicans in Congress are cowards, every last one of them. This isn't a party anymore. It's a hostage situation.
There were two competing headlines that seemed like they couldn't possibly exist in the same universe, and the fact that they do reveals something important. It's Political Rehab this week. MAGA gets its revenge. ICE horrors come to the surface. Mike Johnson's race against time. Kash goes ballistic. Trump third term versus rapid cognitive decline. It's the top stories everyone should be paying more attention to. Let's start, as always, with our Trump dump.
Time for the Trump dump.
They said it wouldn't cost you a dime. Trump's exact words, not one penny of taxpayer money. But this week, Republicans proposed spending $1 billion on his ballroom. $1 billion. Hell, just last week, Rand Paul said he doesn't support using taxpayer money. Rick Scott said we've got $39 trillion in debt. Maybe we should stop spending. Then Republicans turned around and backed a bill that blows up the deficit and adds $72 billion over the next 10 years. This isn't about policy anymore. Gone is fiscal responsibility. Gone is smaller government. This is about survival. Not the country, not the economy, their own survival. Don't believe me? Look at Indiana this week. Republicans who crossed Trump, they got wiped out in their own primaries. That's the message. Step out of line and you're done. Republicans in Congress are cowards, every last one of them. This isn't a party anymore. It's a hostage situation. And now Republicans across the South are rushing to redraw congressional maps before the midterms. And here's the problem with that. They're operating on a false assumption that a Trump voter is a Republican voter. It's not true. Wisconsin, 2024, Trump wins. Tammy Baldwin, one of the most liberal members of the United States Senate, wins. Same state, same day, same voters. Think about that voter profile for a minute. And here's the key. None of the redistricting math takes into account how voters feel about the direction of the country. Trump's at 37% approval. 62% disapprove. That's not underwater. That's drowning. The midterms will be a bloodbath if Trump's approval numbers remain in the toilet. You sure as hell can't redistrict your way around a 37% approval rating. And while all this is happening, Trump's out there calling affordability bullshit. Think about that. People are choosing between groceries and gas, making hard decisions at the kitchen table every single night. Diesel prices are squeezing U.S. farmers who are barely getting by because of tariffs. And the response from the president of the United States is that it's not real. Joe Biden tried that strategy. It destroyed him. It's political suicide. Fox News now shows Democrats ahead on the economy, on inflation, on prices. It's the first time in about 16 years that a Fox News poll has shown Democrats ahead on the economy. We are heading for historic ass kicking, and it's our own damn fault. But here's what nobody is saying out loud. And this is the part that should scare every conservative who's paying attention. Republicans have long stood for smaller, limited government. Trump has the opposite view. Trump's entire movement is built on expanding it. Make America Great is not a call to a free country from government. It's a promise that the federal government, directed by one man, can fix it. That's why spending doesn't bother them. That's why nobody pushes back. That's why the ballroom gets funded and the debt ceiling gets blown through and nobody says a word. Because when loyalty is the price of power, everything else, fiscal responsibility, limited government, what voters actually living through becomes secondary. They made a deal with the devil and the country's going to pay for it.
This week, there were two competing headlines that seemed like they couldn't possibly exist in the same universe, and the fact that they do reveals something important about this president. One was a story about how a federal judge just ruled that Trump's migrant detention policy is illegal. And the other story was about how the Trump administration is putting pressure on immigration judges to move faster and speed up mass deportations. This is not a case of all of us falling into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and living in alternate realities. The explanation, what was revealed by this seeming act of sitting in your car and flooring the accelerator while simultaneously slamming on the brake, is something fundamental to this president and to understanding just how much danger we might be in over the next 2 years. What if I told you that a new analysis from the Associated Press showed that the Trump administration has flat out ignored federal judges' rulings 31 times? And what if I told you that new ruling about mass detentions being illegal was actually a sequel? A different federal judge already made the exact same ruling back in December. And the Trump administration responded by saying, They didn't believe that ruling was binding, so they just went ahead anyway. This says something critical about Trump's entire approach to immigrants and deportation and ICE. And we're going to get more into that in just a few minutes because we learned some appalling new information on that front as well. But more important, it also says something about Trump's entire belief in his power and the constraints on his power. And that becomes incredibly important as we weigh the question of whether he's ever going to give up power at all. And that's something we're also going to be looking at later in this show in our deep dive, and where there is a lot more uncertainty than people think. The bottom line is that we saw in the last few days a harrowing demonstration that the entire philosophy of this administration is who's going to stop us? That's a question that should be on all of our minds in the months and years to come. And speaking of things that should be on our minds, with Congress in recess and 6 months to the midterms, it seems like things are quiet, but it's anything but. So let's take a look at the top 5 most critical stories that people aren't paying enough attention to in our rundown. Matt, you just alluded to Indiana's Republican primaries that concluded this week with Trump-backed candidates overcoming incumbent Republican state senators. These are backed challengers who were contesting these Senate seats because those incumbent senators had opposed Trump on his redistricting demand. What is your main takeaway as a Republican political operative from the outcome?
Those Republicans probably voted with Trump 99% of the time. They opposed him on one thing, and that got him voted out of office. It's expected, but it's also a dangerous pattern. The MAGA purity test is causing us to lose good people. We're losing ideas. Quite frankly, the government is getting dumber, and that's an institution that can't afford to get any dumber. But the story here is not Trump's win in the primary or Trump as the kingmaker. It's really masking what I think is a deeper institutional problem. And it goes back to something we've talked about over and over again. Republicans who are putting their head in the sand and just hoping that we don't get our ass kicked.
I think this story was incredibly revealing and really worth paying attention to. In a way, on the surface, as you said, it shouldn't seem that surprising because these are low turnout primary elections. They usually draw well under 30% of registered voters. And in the 2022 and 2024 cycles, Trump-backed candidates won over 80% of contested GOP primaries across the country. So in a way, this is a dog bites man story. Yeah, like Trump-backed candidates win Republican primaries. But what's really revealing about it is that it shows just how stuck the Republican Party is with Trump. They have the Trump anvil tied around their neck and they're on the edge of the pier, and there's nothing they can do about it because they've correctly concluded that as underwater as he is nationally, as much of a liability as Trump is, if they were to somehow all band together, say, you can't take out all of us, and try to oppose Trump, throw him out, then they'd be worse off because it's not like these candidates would get votes from Democrats or Democratic leaning independents, and they'd split their own base. So they are tied to a sinking ship. That's what this whole story shows, is just how stuck Republicans are and are going to continue to be until Trump leaves the scene.
ICE is back in the news. There's a Washington Post story that says internal ICE records reveal widespread use of force in detention centers. The reports detail how guards have increasingly used chemical agents, physical tactics on detainees. Tom Holman is threatening to flood New York City with ICE agents in direct response to Kathy Hochul pushing laws to restrict ICE cooperation. And now Holman is openly promising large-scale mass deportation operations and expanding arrests. To me, this is a 6-month out from the election story. Immigration is a base issue. It has been quiet. And now Trump is cornered and ICE is back in the news again, conveniently 6 months out. What's your take?
It reminds me of that Atlantic headline from 10 years ago, "The cruelty is the point." I agree with your analysis that this is about base politics. I think it's also about a monomaniacal obsession among certain members of the Trump administration, Stephen Miller most notably, to go after the immigrant issue and to militarize it and damn the torpedoes. This has been both disastrous from a human standpoint, from a policy standpoint, and disastrous from a political standpoint. The fact that's not holding them back shows that there is a kind of quasi religious obsession on the part of certain members of this administration. And it also happens to align with the politics that you're talking about, where as unpopular as the actions of ICE under Trump have been with the general public, with independents, with swing voters, they are motivational to the base and they are all in on their base. It's the only move they have left politically. And you can simultaneously see things like, wow, this accelerated training program wasn't really a training program. We're dropping that because that was a terrible idea. 780 incidents in which ICE facility staff used physical force or chemical agents. That's really bad. On the other hand, at the same time, they're talking about expanding ICE deployments to New York. And I don't think they're that upset, Matt, about these statistics coming out because for a certain segment of their base, abusing migrants is the point. The cruelty is the point. And politically, that's what they want out of it. It's really horrifying, but I think that's the truth.
This is a base issue. And Trump has decided his Hail Mary pass here is go back to base politics and see what you can do. Rally that group, and you throw out the mass deportations, you throw out going into New York because you don't really care about the Washington Post story. That's not important to you. You're trying to get that group of people out there that just says, yes, let's deport, let's get rid of the criminals, as I've said before, is going to blow up in our face.
Speaking of things starting to blow up, I want to talk about the last few days in the U.S. House of Representatives, despite the fact that it looked like the House was minimally functional at the end of last week before they went on recess, passing several must-do bills. There's new reporting this week showing that Speaker Mike Johnson is barely holding things together. It seems like we are right on the verge that things are coming apart at the seams. There are cross currents under the surface that are imperiling his ability to hold the House together. And it seems to me, Matt, my contention here is that this is a race against time. The midterms are 6 months away. The question now is, can Mike Johnson hold the House together as a functioning unit of our government that long or not?
It's going to be a disaster for Mike Johnson. Again, we go back to it 6 months in. This is the time Republicans should actually be putting up legislation they could use to run on, kind of drive back the poison pills against Democrats.
You
None
do
of
that
is-
traditionally at this point in the cycle, right? Like if you
Traditionally,
hold
at
the
this point in the
majority,
cycle.
you put up bills that are message bills that you want to run on in 30-second ads in the fall.
Exactly. And that's not happening because Mike Johnson's out there promising everything and doing none of it. And you got conservative leaders who are now up in arms. At the same time, you have people like Nancy Mace and Laura Boebert who are now releasing the names of payouts in the past, which was 300,000 of payouts that was used by taxpayer money to settle sexual assault claims. And so what's happening and why Mike Johnson has a problem is, first of all, he's horrible as speaker, never should have been speaker, has done a piss poor job and has really just been a puppet for Trump. And that's not what's supposed to be happening. But when you separate that, you're angering your own party while the rest of them are trying to tear it apart. And so all you're going to see is more and more dysfunction going on in the next 6 months.
So basically, Republicans are unable to mount even the basic politics 101 tools in their own political defense.
Yes, but it's really being done because if you look at these members, you look at a Nancy Mace, she's running for governor in South Carolina. So what does she want? More headlines, more click. So she's using her position in the House. We are incapable of actually legislating. And it's a real problem for Mike Johnson. It's a real problem for Republicans. Now, we talk a lot about Kash Patel, but he has accused the FBI of lying to obtain warrants to illegally spy on Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And there are reports that a criminal leak probe tied to a journalist who wrote a damning story that he is now going after the reporter and using the FBI to investigate. In any other time, this would be a First Amendment story, but it's barely showing up. Matt, why are people not talking about these two things right now?
I think insiders correctly recognize that this is the Trump staffer cover your ass self-protection playbook. There's been reporting over the last week, ever since that Atlantic bombshell article detailing Patel's drinking, absenteeism, incoherence, lack of leadership, fundamental misunderstanding of how to do the job leading the nation's top law enforcement agency. Ever since that report came out in the Atlantic, Patel has been on very thin ice, reporting that Trump is considering firing him, reporting that Patel himself thinks that he's the next administration member to go. And so, what do you do in Trump world when you're in this position? You attack Trump's enemies and you play his favorite hits. That's what you do. And so, who are his enemies? The people behind the Russia investigation, the media, and leakers. These are hits that Trump played himself when he got in trouble during his first impeachment and during that Russia investigation. That's really what's going on. That's what Patel is going to cast attention and fault elsewhere and just try to white knuckle it through the next 6 months. It's a very revealing sign, and this is a last ditch effort.
Clearly, Patel has an audience of one, and that's Donald Trump. All this, and you're 100% correct on this, is a move we do in politics all the time. You just muddy the water and then you attack. We know Patel is under the microscope. He is going to be fired soon, and this just plays the Trump, and that's what he wants to do.
It's time for what's become our weekly update on the war in Iran, and we have a slightly different angle this week. There seem to be two conflicting things going on over the past 7 days, and I'd really like to get your read on it, Matt. One is news stories detailing profit taking, profiteering, people with inside political knowledge making a lot of money on the gyrations in the market caused by the war with Iran. On the other hand, there's increasing stress and analysis among experts in the know about just how quickly all of this could spiral out of control, how quickly we could have a cascade effect with constrained supplies and depleted stockpiles of things like oil, fertilizer, and key commodities that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. What was your read on those two conflicting narratives that were sailing past each other this week, even as very little was sailing past each other in the Strait of Hormuz?
The Justice Department's at least starting and opening an investigation into the trades in the oil market. There's a lot of allegations out there that this is really market manipulation by Trump and that people in the know are taking advantage of it. But we normalize corruption at this point in time. I think the real issue is kind of something a little bit bigger. Congress just can't keep up and they continue to work on the wrong things. I heard somebody describe it the other day as like these companies like Polymarket, they're exploiting the gray area. They're taking advantage of this area before Congress ever catches up. And by the time they catch up, they move on to the next thing. And that's what happens when Congress is just, again, working on the wrong things. The fertilizer issue is going to catch up. The lack of oil is going to catch up. It goes back to the fact that Congress has continued to stop watching. Stories like this get ignored. American people are just trying to survive and they're watching all their prices go up. And there's real issues at the heart of it that we don't seem to have the answers.
There's a real let them eat cake vibe to people who are very wealthy, living high while the rest of us suffer with high prices. I think that's why the Ballroom story is resonating. And now, as you mentioned, we've got these stories, nearly $1 billion in crude short positions placed about an hour before Axios reported the US and Iran were close to ending the conflict. Many more stories like that in the billions and billions of dollars. So there are administration insiders, high-placed Republicans, MAGA people who are literally making billions of dollars off of the war while the rest of us are let them eat cake. It's a brewing political issue that could cascade. But of course, the other thing that you mentioned is there's an economic issue that could cascade because we're skating on awfully thin ice. We're relying on stockpiles of key ingredients that make our economy run, that make our food supply happen. And we get closer and closer to the edge of scarcity of that. We get closer and closer to the edge of a total economic meltdown. Speaking of things where we are skating closer and closer to the edge of uncertainty, it's time to talk about a deep dive topic that I really thought we had moved past. We all know the basic reality that Donald Trump is in his second term, and according to the Constitution, this is supposed to be the end of the line. But recently, Trump and his allies have renewed floating the possibility that maybe it really isn't. And that suggests some really deep questions about how real the constitutional protection is against Donald Trump seizing continued power. Let's take a closer look in our deep dive.
Matt GPT, I have a question. Can Donald Trump serve a third term?
The Constitution is clear. No president can serve more than 2 terms. It's been law since 1951. So why is Trump still talking about being in office for 8 or 9 more years? Let's talk about where that law came from and if Donald Trump could actually serve another term. The Founding Fathers actually debated this. At the Constitutional Convention in 1787, there were serious voices in the room who wanted term limits written into the Constitution from the start. They were outvoted. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and others led the argument against them. Their position was straightforward. In a democracy, the people should decide. Term limits, they argued, were undemocratic. They punished good leaders and removed the voters' right to choose. Hamilton went further. He argued that a president who knew he couldn't serve again had less incentive to govern well. Accountability comes from wanting to keep the job. George Washington could have served a 3rd term. He was the most popular figure in the country. Nobody was going to stop him. He said no, because he believed no man should hold that kind of power indefinitely. That decision became a tradition, and that tradition held for 150 years. But then came Franklin Roosevelt. FDR won 4 elections. He guided the country through the Great Depression and World War II. But when Republicans took Congress in 1946, they passed what became the 22nd Amendment. Ratified in 1951, it said no person shall be elected to the office of president more than once. Simple, clear, done. Or so everyone thought until President Trump started talking about a 3rd term and selling hats that say 2028. There are really only 4 theoretical routes for Trump to serve a 3rd term. The first is a constitutional amendment, but you need 2/3 of both chambers and 3/4 of the states. The math is virtually impossible. The second is the vice president's succession workaround, but that is blocked by the 12th Amendment's eligibility language. The third is the Speaker of the House succession, but that too is blocked by Presidential Succession Act's eligibility requirement. So there's really only one path that works, and it goes through the courts, specifically through judges who are willing to reinterpret language in the 22nd Amendment that has never actually been tested in a courtroom. Which brings us to the Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings for Trump's federal court nominees. 4 of them, hoping for a lifetime appointment to the federal bench, couldn't tell Senator Chris Coons whether the president is barred from a 3rd term.
Has President Trump been elected president twice?
President Trump has been certified the President of the United States 2 times.
Is he eligible to run for a 3rd term under our Constitution?
I would have to review the
All I need to tell you is
it.
the language of the constitutional amendment that makes it clear that no, he is not eligible to run for a 3rd term. Anybody else brave enough to say that the Constitution of the United States prevents President Trump from seeking a 3rd term? Anybody willing to apply the Constitution by its plain language in the 22nd Amendment? Nobody. All right, let's move on.
Back in September 2025, Justice Sotomayor said it explicitly.
No one has tried to challenge that. Until somebody tries, you don't know. So it's not settled because we don't have a court case about that issue.
She wasn't being wishy-washy. She was telling you the mechanism by which it gets tested. And Justice Barrett, when Brett Baird asked her if the amendment was cut and dry, she didn't say yes. She said,
that's what the amendment says, right? You know, after FDR had 4 terms, that's what that amendment says.
That's what the amendment says. A response critics noted was conspicuously careful. But here's what I keep coming back to. Trump isn't acting like a man in his final term. The question we should all be asking is this: was this the plan all along? Because if it was, the justice is being confirmed right now may be the most important political story of our time.
There are two stories that one could tell about everything you just laid out. I'm going to give you the first one. You can call it kind of the scientific null hypothesis, the most likely thing that's going on here. This is just another quintessential Trump story. It's about trolling and ego and leverage and money, feeding the story that he might somehow manage to continue being president in 2029 and beyond. It feeds his ego. It's flattering. It provides the trollings, the poking the left, the fueling of a media narrative. It moves the conversation. We're having this conversation right now. So it does a number of personality-driven things and political media things for him. And don't forget that the starting point for understanding any Trump behavior is it's either about his ego or finding a chintzy scheme for making money. And this isn't limited to just selling more MAGA hats. It could also increase leverage for his sons who are literally running around the world, making deals, usually with autocratic regimes, to try to make billions more on crypto or real estate or some other underhanded deal. The prospect that he and his family might continue to wield power into the future makes those deals more attractive and gives him more business leverage.
I think that's what Trump wants people to think it is. I think it works well in his plan to make you think he's just trolling. He's normalizing it. So when you move forward, it's okay because you've been talking about it now for 4 years. Look, he's doing the same thing with executive orders. So he's normalizing that abuse of power anyway. You normalize the rest of it, but you call it, I'm just owning the libs. We're not really being serious. It's just a way to make it okay when you get there.
That's the competing hypothesis here.
Right.
And there's a darker term for what you just described. You said that's normalizing. You could also say it's grooming. And you are right that this fits into a long-standing pattern. Float an idea, repeat it, make it sound like you're half joking. You have a line of retreat. You get your supporters used to hearing it. You see who objects. It's like that line from the movie Signs, the military guy saying, this is a military technique. It's called probing, trying to see what the limits are and how far you can push them. It's really stress testing institutions, and that's fine until the confusion itself becomes a pathway to holding on to power. There's a possibly apocryphal line attributed to President Andrew Jackson after a Supreme Court ruling that the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. The court system relies on this shared understanding that we all have. Oh, you follow the rulings of the courts. It's clear that Trump doesn't fundamentally believe that. Not to mention the fact that we've seen so many examples of this Supreme Court ignoring the clear writing of the Constitution, the letter of the law, the strict constructionist, whatever right-wing term you want to apply. They just ignore it in order to help Donald Trump. So you put it all together, and it sounds like what you're saying is that's a very real possibility to you. The very fact that we can have an in-depth discussion where both of us, with all of our experience in government and politics, say, this is real. This is not that far-fetched, that he might be setting up a real test of let the Supreme Court, like maybe they'll rule with me. And even if they don't, let them enforce it. That is very concerning.
You got Steve Bannon, who has said that there are plans already on the table on how they're going to do it, and he's going to release those later. He is a guy that would be a part of this conversation. They have outlined it. There's a lot of things Trump has done so far in the last year where you've looked at those and said, well, you can't do it, but they found a way to work it through. The other nugget that I would point to, 22nd Amendment has never really been challenged in court. So when you see those justices being asked by Senator Coons and they won't answer, everybody thinks they're just playing to Trump, but they're missing the point because that's not what's happening. They're not playing to Trump. There is a legitimate issue out there, and they're not going on record with it, because when these justices are installed along the way, those are going to be the first places that the lawsuit's going to happen.
This is coming the Death Star conversation, right?
Yes.
Like that moment where the Imperial officer comes to Admiral Tarkin and says, "We've analyzed their attack pattern and there is a danger." And the very fact that we're analyzing the attack pattern and we're saying there is a danger, that's a big deal in itself. We don't have to say that there's certainty here. It's not the danger. The scary part isn't the certainty. The scary part is the plausibility.
Look, I'm of the opinion that as a Republican, do we really think an 81-year-old guy who right now has visible signs of physical and perhaps cognitive issues, is he really our best choice? And if he's the guy we do nominate, do I really think he's going to win? It depends on who the Democrats put up, but probably not. So do I think Trump's going to be president a third term? No, I don't think that's happening. But I do think there is a path. I think they're actively exploring that path, and I think they will exploit that path as much as they possibly can. It may not ever happen, but there is a legitimate path that nobody is really talking about because they just want to say the law is cut and dry. And the reality is the law isn't as cut and dry as we think it is, and they're installing people along the way that could challenge that.
You just brought up a couple of concepts there: Trump's cognitive decline and the mystery of what is happening and why people aren't talking about an issue more. That's exactly the set of questions, the set of puzzles that we're going to examine in this week's That's Bullshit.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Bullshit.
A bullshit?
Do you ever get that eerie feeling that there's something obvious and important happening for all to see, and yet it's almost like there's a conspiracy of silence that no one will talk about it? It's like,
did anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
That's exactly what's happening with what should be the biggest story in the world: President Donald Trump's obvious and alarming mental decline and increasing signs of serious cognitive impairment, which took another turn for the worse this past week. But it's like everyone's agreed not to talk about it, except for late-night comedians and hosts of YouTube shows. Why? I want to tell you what at least the leading theory is. So let's focus on the latest jarring incidents, the political reason why you're not hearing Democrats making a bigger deal out of them, and most importantly, why the Republican side of this is significant. And hint, it's the reason I'm featuring this discussion in this series, which is, after all, called That's Bullshit. First, what were those latest disturbing incidents? There was this one in which Trump bragged about something that's not really a resume item.
I'm the only president to take a cognitive test.
Why do you think they keep giving you cognitive tests over and over again, sir? Seriously, why would you brag about this? Besides, there's a very obvious problem that regardless of whether you can tell the difference between a bear and a giraffe.
The first question is very easy. It's a lion, a giraffe, a bear, and a shark. They say, which one is the bear?
There's the fact that it doesn't really matter if you can pass a screen for Alzheimer's when your public behavior has been repeatedly so obviously unhinged, like in this recent Oval Office meeting, where he proceeded to terrify a group of children with an unhinged rant.
We have to make a journey down to Iran to take the nuclear weapon. It was obliterated, for those that are not aware. These are sick people. And all of a sudden, a woman dropped dead with a bullet right there. These stupid people. You know why? Because they don't have any votes anymore. They came in from prisons and mental institutions. You think you can take me in a fight?
That rant went on for 9 minutes and 47 seconds. And by the way, this is not even the only time he's done that in the past month. Here he is rambling incoherently at terrified children at the White House Easter egg roll.
I would use the auto. He'd have an autofit follow Joe Biden. He didn't sign. He was incapable of signing his in. So they'd follow him around with his big machines, notary skull, and autopad.
Which my colleague Matt pointed out on this show a couple of weeks ago is a stunning twin of when Dwight Schrute does the exact same thing.
From Q3 to Q4, up 17%, while his sales down 2%. It's all there in the report.
There's not any question, not for any adult who's paying attention. The president is no longer mentally competent. So there's the mystery. Why aren't the Democrats talking about it? Well, the political answer is this: they shouldn't. I know it sounds weird to say. It's like seeing Leatherface in your living room and suddenly getting worried, did I leave the stove on? The issue is, we've seen this horror movie before. Democrats have tried to make the case that Trump was deranged, senile, incoherent, and in the last election, Tim Walz's version, weird. It never worked. Here they are in a Senate hearing 10 months ago, showing a video, which I'll cut down to just a few highlights, because this is itself a subset of hundreds and hundreds of examples.
I'd like you to see a short video that includes some other examples of cognitive ability.
The windmills are driving the whales crazy, obviously. I have concepts of a plan. They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. I know about magnets is this. Give me a glass of water. The kidney has a very special place in the heart. When you ran out the healthy arms, you ran out of really healthy. They had great arms, but they ran out.
There's an old joke about a guy who goes to a psychiatrist and says, "Doc, you got to help me. My brother thinks he's a chicken." The psychiatrist says, "You want me to convince him he's not?" And the man says, "That's the thing. I need the eggs." Voters will accept crazy if it lowers the price of eggs or the price of anything. Polling shows it's not only far and away the thing voters care the most about, it's what the voters who are most up for grabs, who Democrats need to win over, care about. So, of course, I feel like it should be an issue that we have a chainsaw-wielding maniac in the White House. But if I were in my old job as a chief of staff for a member of Congress or running their campaigns, I would tell them not to talk about it. Sadly, it's just not a winning issue. That gets us to the third point: the looks on the faces of the people around Trump. The dirty little secret is they know full well what's happening here. Democrats don't have the power to do anything about it, but Republicans do. Even if the 25th Amendment is a long shot, if congressional Republicans and cabinet members truly had the interests of the country at heart, they would never allow a situation like this to continue. And they do have the power to band together to stop someone who's dangerously mentally unfit from holding this tremendous amount of power over the rest of us. But they won't, because they just care about their own careers. And that is bullshit. And finally, let's close, as we always do, with a dose of hope.
The Pope got hung up on by customer service. That's not a joke. This actually happened. A close friend of his, the Reverend Tom McCarthy, told a gathering of Catholics in Naperville, Illinois last week.
2 months in, he calls his bank in South Chicago to change his phone number. And so he gets a lady, says, "Yes, ma'am, I'm Robert Prevost. I'd like to change." She asks all the security questions. And then they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. It says here you have to come in person." And he said, "That's not gonna. I'm not gonna be able to do that. Would it matter to you if I told you I'm Pope Leo?" She hung up on him.
Look, yes, I picked this story because I thought it was funny, and I laughed at an image of the Pope showing up at his bank in long, flowing white robes with the big hat just to change his phone number. But I really picked this story because we've all had that call. Different problem, same ending. You start with something simple, had 40 minutes later, you're still explaining it again to someone who can't actually fix it. You try to say it better, you try to say it clear, maybe even get a little louder. None of it matters. But it occurred to me that even the Pope, the most powerful person in the world, doesn't get special treatment everywhere. But I'll tell you what, the next time I'm on the phone with Verizon and on hold for an hour, I'm still going to try. Would it help if I told you I'm the Pope?
I guess you can say that customer service rep isn't a papal person. I want to talk about 3 stories that have nothing to do with politics this week. And that's the point. Number 1, scientists produced new forms of matter through magnetic manipulation. Number 2, researchers achieved major advances in fertility preservation for childhood cancer survivors. And number 3, scientists accidentally discovered previously unknown DNA behavior that may reshape our understanding of genetics. You may have noticed that I'm telling you 3 science stories. Why? Because while politics consumes our attention, especially on this show, quietly in the background and in a profound way, human knowledge keeps advancing. People who are doing serious work that affects our world are still at work. Every week in politics, it feels like civilization is collapsing. Look, people are hanging up on the Pope, for goodness sakes. Meanwhile, doctors are extending fertility, physicists are discovering new kinds of materials that could reshape our world, and researchers are repairing the tissues inside our body itself. Humanity keeps inventing the future while cable news is screaming at itself. One of the healthiest things that you can remember is that politics isn't everything. It's not the only thing. It's not even a slice of everything. And while we're doom scrolling, the rest of the world is just casually rewriting our reality. The species still knows how to build, and the world is bigger than politics. And I find that, especially in weeks like this, a profoundly hopeful thought. And on that note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.